There's a room beneath Malta that shouldn't exist. Not because of its age, though it's over 5,000 years old. Not because of its size, though it extends through multiple carved chambers deep underground. But because of what it does to your brain when someone speaks inside it. A single word, spoken at the right pitch, magnifies 100-fold and reverberates through your skull in ways that make your internal thoughts go quiet. Researchers call it the oracle room, and it's tuned to a frequency that shuts down the language center of your brain. That's not metaphor, that's neuroscience. Modern brain imaging shows that when humans are exposed to 110 hertz, the exact resonant frequency of this ancient chamber, activity in the left temporal region drops significantly. Your prefrontal cortex shifts from left-sided dominance to right-sided. Language processing dims, emotional centers light up. You're still conscious, still aware, but you're not thinking in words anymore. You're experiencing something older, something that operates beneath language entirely. And here's what makes this truly unsettling. This isn't unique to Malta. Irish burial mounds called cairns, constructed from completely different materials in a completely different era by completely different cultures, all resonate at 111 hertz. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, shows the same acoustic properties. Chavin de Huanta in Peru, constructed by people who never contacted Mediterranean civilizations, features chambers that produce identical frequency effects. Stone temples in India, megalithic sites across Britain, ceremonial centers throughout the ancient world, they all hum at the same note. That's not coincidence, that's engineering. But engineering requires knowledge, and the conventional timeline insists these cultures didn't possess it. We're told they were primitive, that their architectural achievements were products of trial and error, religious fervour, and vast amounts of manual labour. We're not told they understood neuroscience. We're definitely not told they built structures specifically designed to alter human consciousness using precise acoustic frequencies. Yet that's exactly what the evidence shows. Walk into the Hypogeum in Malta and you'll descend through 3 levels of carved stone. The deeper you go, the more the architecture starts to feel wrong. Not unstable, not poorly made, but wrong in the sense that it doesn't match what humans supposedly knew 5,000 years ago. The walls are smooth, the curves are mathematically precise. The oracle room itself is shaped with such acoustic sophistication that sound researchers still can't fully explain how Neolithic people achieved it without modern instruments or acoustic theory. A male voice tuned to the chamber's resonant frequency doesn't just echo. It stimulates a phenomenon throughout the entire structure, creating what witnesses describe as bone-chilling effects. Sounds linger for 8 seconds. Archaeologist Fernando Coimbra reported feeling the vibrations cross his body at high speed, leaving behind a sensation of deep relaxation. Volunteers tested in the space showed individual activation frequencies between 90 and 120 hertz. Those with frontal lobe dominance reported receiving thoughts similar to meditative states. Those with occipital lobe dominance experienced vivid mental imagery. These aren't subjective spiritual experiences. These are measurable neurological changes. Research directed by Professor Robert Jan tested acoustic behaviour in megalithic sites across the UK. Every single one sustained strong resonance between 95 and 120 hertz. The pattern held regardless of size, material or construction method. Whatever these builders were doing, they were doing it deliberately, and they were doing it everywhere. The frequency itself matters more than you'd think. At 110 hertz, your brain doesn't just relax. It fundamentally shifts operational modes. The language centers that normally dominate your conscious experience go dim. The areas associated with mood, empathy, and social behavior activate. Emotional processing takes precedence over analytical thinking. You remain aware, but you're experiencing reality through a completely different neurological filter. Sound researchers Tom Danley and Paul Devereux have documented that certain ancient chambers resonate at what modern therapy calls healing frequencies. The 110 Hz tone links directly to altered consciousness states, deep meditative theta rhythms, even physical regeneration processes. Temple bells in ancient India were designed to produce vibrations matching alpha brainwaves, the frequency associated with calmness and spiritual clarity. The Vitala temple in Hampi features musical pillars carved from solid granite, each producing specific notes when struck, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of acoustic properties in different materials. But here's where it gets stranger. These architectural acoustics don't work alone. The temples were designed as complete sensory environments. Darkness, disorienting corridors, geometric patterns that draw the eye into repetitive motion, ritual context that primes expectation, and underneath it all, humming through the stone itself, frequencies that directly alter brain function. The combination doesn't just affect consciousness, it overwhelms it, creating experiences so profound that people interpreted them as contact with the divine. Modern neuroscience reveals why. Infrasound below 10 Hz affects the central nervous system in ways you don't consciously perceive. The hair cells in your inner ear are most sensitive to frequencies below 30 Hz. You don't hear these sounds as sound, you feel them as pressure, oddness, swaying, generalized discomfort. Research shows infrasound administered near hearing threshold increases connectivity in the right superior temporal gyrus, anterior cingulate cortex, and right amygdala, the exact regions associated with processing fear and awe. You walk into these temples, the architecture disorients you, the darkness heightens your other senses. Then the chanting starts, or the drums, or the conch shell trumpets, like those found at Chavan de Huantar. The sound doesn't come from any identifiable direction. The maze-like corridors deliberately mislead you about the source. And your brain, already primed by sensory deprivation and ritual expectation, gets hit with frequencies that bypass conscious processing entirely. What would you have thought you were experiencing 3,000 years ago? The priests weren't fooling people. They were using technology we've only recently begun to understand. Walk into Göbekli Tepe today and you're standing in a temple complex that predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. We're talking 9,600 BC. Hunter-gatherers, according to the standard timeline, hadn't even figured out agriculture yet, but somehow they carved and arranged massive stone pillars in precise geometric patterns, aligned to astronomical observations, and engineered specific acoustic properties into the architecture itself. Archaeoacoustic exploration at Enclosure D revealed something that still puzzles researchers. The pillars examined appear to sit at the center of a sophisticated mechanism involving both vibrations and magnetic fields. Not decorative, functional. At 14 Hz, a frequency found consistently across sacred sites from South Anatolia to the British Isles, often accompanied by localized magnetic field anomalies that shouldn't exist in natural geology. The architectural dimensions weren't arbitrary. The ancient formula for temple proportion at Göbekli Tepe followed a 20 by 30 cubit ratio. Using the royal cubit of 21 inches, a room 30 cubits long produces a resonant frequency of 21.5 Hz. That's not coincidence. That's engineering. Mathematical precision applied to manipulate how sound behaves in enclosed spaces, creating standing waves at frequencies we now know directly affect human consciousness. But the sophistication goes deeper than hitting the right frequency. These builders understood something about combined sensory manipulation that modern concert hall engineers are only beginning to replicate. Take the geometry itself. Domes don't just look impressive, they focus and amplify sound towards specific locations. Ancient Indian temples positioned idols at acoustic nodes, points where resonance reached maximum intensity. When thousands of devotees chanted simultaneously, the vibrations didn't just fill the air, they filled bodies, cells, creating full-spectrum physiological effects that reinforced the spiritual experience. The architecture became an instrument played by human voices. Now jump to Peru. Chavan de Huántar, built over 3,000 years ago, features interior architecture that reads like a masterclass in acoustic deception. Elaborate multi-level mazes with corridors and staircases, engineered to do something specific, mislead you about where sound originates. Sound. Researchers placed test subjects at various locations throughout the temple, played tones from fixed positions, and watched people consistently misjudge the source direction. The passages deliberately confuse spatial perception. You hear the oracle speaking, but you can't tell where the voice comes from. It seems to emanate from the walls themselves, from the darkness, from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The instruments matter just as much. Conch shell trumpets called pututus, excavated from the site, produce haunting warbling tones when blown. Acoustic measurements prove these weren't random musical choices. The pututus dynamically linked to the Lanzon monolith at the temple's heart. Instrument and architecture form a unified system, an oracle mechanism projecting sound from restricted inner chambers to the public exterior spaces. The frequencies produced match both human vocal ranges and the resonant properties of the alcoves, creating that shower-singing richness, except exponentially more powerful. Some modern visitors report nausea as low-frequency tones vibrate through their bodies in the darkness. Others feel profound relaxation after extended exposure, describing the sensation as being in a different world entirely. Both responses are neurologically predictable. Those frequencies trigger vestibular responses, affecting balance and spatial orientation. Your inner ear interprets vibrations. It can't categorize as normal sound. The result? Whole body pressure sensations, oddness, swaying, discomfort, or euphoria, depending on individual neurological wiring. The pattern holds globally. Ireland's burial mounds, the cairns, despite being constructed from different materials at different sizes, all resonate at 111 Hz. Not close. Exactly. Someone mapped that frequency across an entire culture's sacred architecture. Malta's hypogeum goes further. The oracle room exhibits double resonance at 70 and 114 Hz. William Arthur Griffiths documented that words spoken there magnify 100-fold, audible throughout the entire underground structure. Imagine the psychological impact. You're in absolute darkness, the architecture disorients you. Then the oracle speaks, and the voice doesn't come from a person. It thunders through stone, through your bones, seemingly from the earth itself. Modern analysis shows the hypogeum's creators fine-tuned dimensions across multiple, non-contiguous chambers. The peak frequencies space evenly, resembling a whole-tone musical scale. This wasn't accidental carving. This was precision acoustic engineering 5,000 years before we supposedly understood the physics involved. The mathematical principles underlying these systems directly parallel quarter-wave resonance formulas derived through modern experimentation. Cross-cultural examination reveals identical relationships between Pythagorean harmonic ratios, golden ratio proportions, and acoustic resonance engineering. Separate civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, independently discovered and applied the same acoustic principles. Or did they? Because the consistency raises uncomfortable questions. How did cultures with no documented contact all converge on 110 Hz? How did they all understand that geometric proportions determine resonant frequencies? How did they all recognize that combining architectural acoustics with ritual context and sensory deprivation creates predictable neurological EFF acts? The implications extend beyond impressive engineering. These spaces weren't designed for passive observation. They were consciousness alteration chambers, technologies for systematically inducing specific mental states in large populations simultaneously. The priests entering these temples weren't pretending to commune with the divine. The acoustics genuinely facilitated altered states. Modern interpretations suggest practices deliberately induced trance states in both clergy and worshippers, enhancing spiritual experiences through measurable neurological changes. Archaeologist Chris Scarr points out that temples functioned as stage sets for vast ceremonies. Creating mysterious, otherworldly sounds wasn't deception. It was the entire point. A powerful element, yes, but also a tool for mass neurological manipulation. Think about the control mechanism here. The control. You gather hundreds, sometimes thousands of people into these chambers. The architecture itself disorients them through deliberate maze design. Darkness removes visual reference points. Then you introduce frequencies that shut down language centers while amplifying emotional processing. You're not just creating a spiritual experience, you're engineering predictable brain states across entire populations simultaneously. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates this wasn't primitive experimentation. The site dates to 9,600 BC, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. Yet archaeoacoustic analysis confirms it possesses the same sophisticated features found in every other sacred site studied across Europe and Asia. The pillars at Enclosure D sit at the center of a mechanism generating specific vibrations and magnetic fields that directly affect brain function. This contradicts everything we think we know about the technological capabilities of that era. The presence of 14 Hz appears consistently across these ancient sites. Not approximately 14 Hz, exactly 14 Hz. At Göbekli Tepe, researchers localized powerful magnetic fields accompanying these frequencies. The architectural dimensions weren't arbitrary. The ancient formula used there employed proportions of 20 by 30 qubits. When calculated using the royal qubit of 21 inches, a 30-qubit chamber produces wavelengths corresponding to 21.5 Hz. Mathematical tuning, not accidental resonance. India's ancient temples reveal yet another layer. The Vitala temple in Hampi features musical pillars carved from solid granite. Each pillar produces distinct notes when struck, designed to contribute specific tones during religious ceremonies. The entire temple geometry was constructed around sound propagation. Domes amplified frequencies, corridors channeled them. Idols were positioned at acoustic nodes where resonance reached maximum strength. When thousands chanted together, the vibrations didn't just fill the air. They filled bodies, cells, consciousness itself. Temple bells weren't decorative. Their frequencies were calibrated to match alpha brainwaves, the state associated with calmness and spiritual clarity. Modern acoustic engineers studying these structures found that chanting amplifies specific frequencies known to alter brainwave patterns, promoting focus and transcendent states. The ancient builders understood material properties we're only now rediscovering through scientific analysis. Here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. Each volunteer tested in these spaces has an individual activation frequency, always falling between 90 and 120 Hz. Those with frontal lobe dominance during exposure report receiving ideas and thoughts similar to meditation states. Those with occipital lobe dominance visualize images. Different neurological profiles, different experiences, but all predictably altered through the same acoustic mechanism. Ancient populations achieved altered consciousness without chemical substances. Sound ritual led devotees into trance states that increased emotional and social intelligence. Modern neuroscience validates this. Long-term meditation practice demonstrably sculpts brain architecture toward patience, emotional balance, and creativity. The temples weren't just worship spaces. They were consciousness refinement centers operating on principles we're only beginning to understand scientifically. Fernando Coimbra, descending into Malta's hypogeum, described feeling sound cross his body at high speed, leaving profound relaxation afterward. Sounds echo for 8 seconds in those chambers. 8 seconds of sustained resonance washing through flesh and bone. The voice doesn't fade. It multiplies, transforms, becomes something beyond human vocal cords. The multisensory bombardment explains the power. Acoustic resonance combined with absolute darkness, architectural disorientation, and ritualistic context creates synergistic consciousness alteration, far exceeding any single element. You can't separate the sound from the space, from the ceremony, from the darkness. They function as integrated technology. Modern sound therapy validates what ancients intuitively grasped. Frequencies influence physical matter, emotional states, brainwave activity. We've rebranded their knowledge as vibrational therapy, but the principles remain identical. Low frequencies ground, high frequencies clarify. Specific tones trigger specific neurological responses. Temple priests chanted in measured tones matching internal body rhythms because they understood something we forgot, then rediscovered. Research confirms that 110 Hz significantly reduces brain activity in language centers, allowing other cognitive processes to dominate. The shift from left to right prefrontal cortex dominance affects emotional processing and creativity. An atmosphere of resonant sound at this frequency activates brain regions governing mood, empathy, and social behavior, not metaphorically, measurably. The mathematical relationships governing these systems parallel quarter-wave resonance formulas. Cross-cultural examination reveals identical principles linking Pythagorean harmonic ratios, golden ratio proportions, and acoustic engineering. This provides the first comprehensive framework unifying ancient acoustic technology with modern consciousness research. Separate civilizations discovered the same mathematical truths because those truths are fundamental to how sound interacts with human neurology. Systematic research at Charvin demonstrated that ancient acoustics don't just affect individual experience. They transform understanding of place and social relations. Sonic symbols parallel visual depictions architecturally encoded throughout the site. Multi-channel messaging through sight and sound simultaneously. Information transmitted through multiple sensory pathways, embedding deeper than conscious awareness. The acoustic properties weren't incidental features. They were fundamental to these structures' spiritual and social functions. You can't understand the temples without understanding the sound. You can't understand the ceremonies without experiencing the frequencies. And you can't replicate the consciousness states without reconstructing the complete environmental conditions. That's what we've lost. Not just buildings, not just knowledge. Access to consciousness states our ancestors routinely achieved through architectural technology we no longer build. States that shape their perception of reality, their social structures, their relationship with existence itself. The temples still stand. The frequencies still resonate. But we've forgotten how to listen. We call them primitive. We call them ancient. We call them pre-scientific. But they built machines we're only now learning to recognize as machines, not mechanical devices. Neurological instruments carved from stone and mathematics. Chambers that don't move, but still operate, still function, still produce measurable effects on human consciousness every single time someone enters and the right frequencies fill the space. Modern neuroscience required brain imaging technology to discover what happens at 110 Hz. These builders figured it out with stone and sound alone, then encoded that knowledge into architecture spanning continents and millennia. The same frequencies, the same geometric proportions, the same understanding of how vibration rewires awareness. Perhaps the real question isn't how they knew. Perhaps it's what we lost when we stopped building spaces designed to systematically alter consciousness. When we stopped treating architecture as technology for accessing states of mind our ancestors considered sacred, essential, fundamental to human experience. The temples remain. The frequencies haven't changed. The Oracle Room in Malta still resonates at 110 Hz. Chavin still confuses sound directionality. Göbekli Tepe still generates those 14 Hz vibrations with accompanying magnetic fields. The technology still works. We just forgot it was technology at all.